item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there anything, any changes? And it being a special call meeting, I'd say we probably should.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, show of hands. None opposed, motion carries. Start with workshop. Nathan, we know you've got something to do, so we're gonna call on you first. And Don, if I missed something, you tell me, but what brought this up was looking at our zoning ordinance under R3 for multi-family housing. We've noticed that our maximum density is 1 unit per half acre.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
And I've looked at some other cities, typically for multifamily, like for an apartment complex or something like that. In a city our size, it's more 10 to 12
Right.
per acre, not per half acre. So it's what we found. Looked at Jasper's just this morning, and Don recognized it, and I did too, and we think it's the same wording that ours originally had, and we don't know what happened, but sometime during codification or something, we don't know for sure when it got changed, but it was 7,500 square feet of land for the first unit, 3,000 square feet for each additional unit. That, if you add that up, it comes out to about 12 to 13 units per acre, and that's what Don recollects ours being, and I
ours
remember
was
reading
that.
it too, but somewhere along the line it has gotten changed. So the question is now, we've got somebody interested in doing something, how to efficiently move forward without, so that's why I got Ethan in to look at the ordinance and give us a little advice.
Thank you, Mayor. And I remember after talking the other day, I looked at a couple of other communities. I understand that you had already looked into Jasper, and so I thought, well, what are some other communities that have some similar ordinance and some similar lay of the land? And I looked over in Fannin County in Blue Ridge, and looked at the city of Blue Ridge's ordinance. That's an ordinance that our office has worked with quite a bit over the years, and looked at their matrix like that. And for apartments, it's very much the same, 7,500 square feet for the first unit and 4,000 square feet for each additional unit, not to exceed 10 dwelling units per acre, and that includes apartments and condominiums. And then you have other things like duplexes, and that requires 10,000 square feet of lot area to have a duplex, which of course is only 2 units, 1 building per parcel. And
10,000, that's roughly a quarter acre.
10,000 roughly a quarter acre, 43,560 square feet in an acre, correct? So, the 20,000, 23, 24,000, roughly half an acre. I've got a couple of things, I'm gonna hand these out to y'all. I printed a few off just because it's easy to follow along, and these are just some things to think about. Now, the first page is just some definitions. I know that we've previously talked or been in conversation about some other uses and definitions and things, but if you flip past that first page and we just look at what the second, third pages have to offer, and that talks a little bit about multifamily and looks at both that matrix from Blue Ridge as well as one from Whitfield County. If you look at them, they're very, very similar in nature, and the fact that they do require that 7,500 for the first unit. And of course, the second matrix that's from Whitfield County is a unified zoning ordinance, so it's accounting for both the cities and the county, and that's why in there you'll see that it has sewer and on-site in parentheses, because a lot of folks in the county still have a septic system rather than sewer. But I think for probably the city of Ellijay, anyone is going to have sewer if they're going to have multifamily, more than likely. So that, and also some other things in there about yard setbacks, maximum lot coverage, and minimum lot widths, things like that, all kind of are written in here for multifamily. And I think these are very similar to what you're looking at in some other communities as well. So these might be some good parameters for us to follow, because they're tried and true, they've been used, they've not been overthrown or anything like that. They've been rather successful for us in other communities, and kind of lets that, it opens the door for opportunity, but not too far for inappropriate development or overdevelopment and things like that. So there's also some language about townhouses and condominiums, Because of course, when you look at multifamily, it's not all created equal. You have duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes. You have apartments, which is essentially anything greater than a quadplex. And those are generally owned by a single individual and rented, units that are rented individually. And of course, you have condominiums, which are owner occupied, but then the parking lot, the general land area, and so on and so forth is owned by a common entity, an HOA or something to that degree. And then you have townhouses, which are kind of their own entity, because in a townhouse, you have kind of the best of both worlds. It allows you to get a higher residential density than you would in just a single-family type environment. And it allows you to have owner-occupied units, but those units are attached. So in other words, if you have a 4-unit townhouse, if you were looking at this table and you had, let's say, 2 units, and right there was the divider, a unit over here and a unit over there, the center of that has to have a firewall that extends up above the roof. There, I think it's roughly 3 feet, just for argument's sake, and above 3 feet above the roof, and firewall in between, so that if one side catches fire, fire will not spread to the other side, most likely, or at least be slowed down significantly, unlike in an apartment or another type of dwelling. And the other thing that separates them is the fact that this person over here in this unit owns the building. They also own the lot that's associated with that building, the front yard, backyard, side yard, all that, and the same thing for that individual over there. So you can have a separate owner here and a separate owner there, and doesn't have to be that HOA entity like with a condominium, and there's not necessarily a landlord, it's owner-occupied housing. So you get that single family, they call it single family attached dwellings. And so that gives you that type of ability as well with townhouses. And those have their own classification here and are set up with the same density specifications essentially as a duplex. So roughly the same guidelines. And then there's some associated text that helps draw out the townhouses and condominiums about opens. It just addresses things like I was mentioning about open space and HOA. It just lays out all these parameters to make sure that these things are in place as they need to be if the development's going to be approved and be able to get building permits to be completed. And after that, I also put in there a little bit about mixed use. For y'all to look at and having a mixed-use district. And of course that can impact multifamily as well, with the opportunity for apartment-style, loft-style dwelling above retail space generally. Kind of more low-intensity retail, but general retail commercial space. And I wanted to put that language in there, and it kind of lays out roughly what a mixed-use district would be. And also describes it as part of a mixed-use district. People can't just come and get a property rezoned mixed use and just say, well, we want to do this, this, and this. They actually have to come forth, or you should be requiring them to come forth with a plan, a preliminary plan that would essentially, and I've got a definition in here to show you all what we consider a preliminary plan. It's kind of like a plat formally drawn by a professional, and that would show you the positions, the buildings that they're intending to build, kind of what the uses for those buildings are going to be, parking, ingress, egress, all those things about that property. And then in order for them to get a building permit, then they generally have to come back and submit a final plan, which is much more thorough and in-depth. And in order for them to get any building permits or for that rezoning to be completely official, they have to present those plans for the council to approve and for staff to go through and make sure that all the applicable regulations are being satisfied, and also can attach conditions onto a mixed use. In other words, there may be special conditions that are not necessarily addressed in the ordinance that staff, council see that may become an issue that can be addressed as part of conditional approval as part of a mixed use. And that way, if that property is rezoned, it shows up on the map as its own district moving forward. When you get new staff members or other people who are looking at this, or just several years later, staff's looking back trying to remember what were those conditions, or if there's ever an issue, then you can go back, you can look that up, and immediately draw reference to it. And it's just a very easy way to keep track of things, because a lot of times things slip through the cracks with a general rezoning and you forget, did we attach a conditions, or what year did we do that, or where's that in my file? But mixed use is much, kind of draws your attention in, because that's going to show up as a whole different color on the map and is going to stand out. So you can go back and research into that if you ever were to see an issue arising with the property later on. Make sure that they're upholding those conditions that they agreed to when that was approved.
So a district could be a block, city block.
A district could be, would essentially be a parcel of land, and that could encompass a block. It could be just a single parcel that has a couple of acres.
Just has its own designation.
That's right. And what it does is it allows for the mix of commercial, light commercial, and residential. Because otherwise, if you have residential, you can't have commercial, and vice versa. It's certainly in the same building. There's some office residential opportunities where you can have, well, you could build an office in this building, or you can use it as a single family home or something like that. But to have commercial downstairs and residential upstairs, you really need a mixed use district. And it also allows for other things like different kind of commercial uses in different buildings. It just allows for some creativity opportunities to arise. But again, it gives full discretion of approval to the council to be able to review an actual site plan, so that it's not speculative or anything like that. There's an actual attached and professionally drawn plan that can be reviewed and covered, and that any conditional requirements that council sees necessary or fit can be applied to that specific parcel district.
Well, the specific issue we're dealing with today, I'm going to ask for if you can advise on, it's a 5-acre tract, is that correct?
5-acre tract.
They're proposing number of units
61 total units.
on 5 acres.
And they gave me a little preliminary plan, but it's not really near detailed enough because they show a lot of green areas that are obviously grass. It appears when you count the buildings and parking spaces that all that's adequate. But what's deceiving is a green space that runs along there. You don't know if that's a 5-foot wide strip of grass or a 15-foot strip of grass. It's hard to quantify on this drawing how much actual open space you have other than parking, roads, and apartments.
But that falls, that's roughly 12 units
Yes.
per acre, which is what
That's correct. This
seems to be uniform.
Mm-hmm. It would meet that.
You had mentioned in our conversation about possibly doing a conditional use in this particular parcel instead of
The council
trying to change.
could look into a higher density apartment style dwelling in other words, if you're going to be in excess of the 10 units per acre, which sounds like you roughly came out to 12 units per acre, it may be a possibility to say, well, we want 10 units an acre, unless you want to come forth with a conditional use request to do a higher density than what we generally allow, what y'all generally allow, and that is on the high density residential. And a conditional use review, as opposed to just opening the gates, again, allows for staff and council to review that specific rezoning and that property and what they propose, to make sure that if there need to be conditions attached as far as to address parking and other things, and the buildings themselves, and they can attach specific conditions onto that rezoning in order to make that possible, because it's a little higher density than what the city's standard density would allow. Even if you adopt a similar density to Jasper or Blue Ridge or Whitfield County, that's still that 10 not to exceed 10 units per acre may be exceeded, and therefore you could have an opportunity again for a conditional use permit for that higher density than what you allow outright, and that are high density residential.
So what are y'all's thoughts on this particular, and Kent, what's the timeline? What's that the developer's looking to do on this particular development?
He's ready to move forward, just pending whatever y'all decide. I actually got a text from him just a few minutes ago. I asked him what rent rates he was looking at, because I've done some look at our local demographics, and we've got voids in almost every price point, but I think there's real opportunity for the city to be looking at exactly what we want to see as well. But he's ready to move forward right away. He said that it was still a little bit preliminary, but 2-bedroom, 2 baths, he's looking at a rate of about $900, and on the 3-bedroom, 2 baths, about $1,075 a month. Honestly, this email or this text message says that he could probably bring the rate down if the density went up, and he's talking about 16 units per acre, and that may be getting higher than what the city would want to consider, in my opinion. But because unless you put conditions on it, he could get the higher density and not bring the rate down, and there could be some issues with that. So, but he has Richard Landau, who has worked on the rough draft of that site plan that Don was referencing, is also working on an elevation. I told him that I could not foresee anyone wanting to move forward until they knew if the apartments were going to look like Austin Place, or if they were going to look at like some of the other units that we know around town or around the county. So they're working on the front elevation for y'all as well at this point. He's ready to move forward.
Well, we definitely need it, and we've got to have housing for people, so. 16 sounds like it's be pretty packed in there per acre if they wanted to do 16.
John, how many units per acre do you have on that?
I don't know about, my math skills are not too good. I went to Gilmer.
Oh,
I'm not ever calculated that. I have 2.4 acres and I have 26 units. I have 18 twos and 8 ones.
So that would be in line with what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
As
And-
far as, we're saying 50, right? 50 units instead of 16? I mean,
He's 61 is what.
This
10
one-
per acre. That comes out to about 10 per acre, doesn't it, John?
Yes.
Approximately?
Yeah, 13 an
Okay.
acre.
13 an acre?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, yeah, 2.4.
We're in the ballpark, yeah.
Right. And the rents, I had not heard these rents until right now, and that's exactly where we are right now. So and that's where the whole market is in that price point. Mrs. Caldwell asked me what is exactly defined as affordable rent, and did some work on that as well. But generally, it's about 30% of what you earn. So if you earn $1,000 a month, that's $300. If you earn $400 or $4,000 a month, then that's $1,200. But I had to get John recently to hold a unit open so that we could even place a 6-year degree teacher that's coming to the school system that couldn't find anything. So while you do have the issue of what is affordable housing, you also have the issue of availability of housing. It doesn't matter what you can afford to pay if you can't find anything. And so a lot of communities are even starting to use the phrase as they look at different zones or different, however Ethan would give me the proper term for it, but different parcels, saying that it's targeted towards young professionals. Because when you have a teacher coming to town and they have difficulty finding a place, that tells you a whole lot.
Yeah.
So as a question to y'all, would you, what I'd said about Jasper's, and don't you agree that's what ours said?
I think that's
originally
exactly what
For
ours.
7,500
Right.
square feet for the first unit, 3,000 for each additional.
Mhm.
And then probably would want to put in a not to exceed per acre, right? What, would you want to be at the 10 or the 12? What? Y'all have a preference?
All right, John, you said yours is like 12-ish per acre,
Okay.
11 or 12.
10 something.
Which apartment complex is this?
Austin Place,
Where is that?
Chatsworth Highway,
Okay,
3 miles.
okay.
And if
10 or
you,
12, yeah. I would say.
doesn't that seem to you to be fairly uniform? So we can work on an ordinance then to start moving that, change it. Okay.
Of course, you know, whatever that ordinance would be, we'd have to have requirements about what they would submit to Don.
Right. Because remember, just number of units per acre also doesn't designate how big a building can be, how big a unit can be. It could be a 1-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, it could be a large 3-bedroom or a small 3-bedroom, so.
That's true.
And it doesn't dictate the green space either, that you know.
So we have to, so Don, we would have to incorporate in the ordinance, or if we're amending it or whatever, we have to incorporate the amount of green space.
I don't know that you
That's
have
right.
to, but I think that's probably a better question for Ethan. Maybe the question ought to be asked, how far can the council go in stipulating the design elements of the apartments? In other words, dictating green or slash
And
open space.
parking,
Parking,
And appearance.
appearance, thank you, that
aesthetics.
kind of thing.
Parking can certainly be addressed in your ordinance. There probably already is a section on parking related to business and residential that may already have something in there that says usually it's 1.5 spaces per unit. It's the overall average used, and most people add a few more. It's recommended to just to keep people from parking on the streets or out in common areas. And then your stormwater, you know, after you look at your parking area, you've got total lot coverage and all these things that come into play in stormwater that may even be outside of zoning when it comes to green space and things like that. Although you could specify that there needs to be a minimum amount of actual green space as part of an apartment, a percentage of the lot. I can see if there's an average on something like that. Appearance standards are absolutely something that you can adopt for any residential. As a matter of fact, in our last legislative session, there was a bill put forth, I believe it was House Bill 302, that didn't make it through crossover because the Realtors Association, I believe, and a couple other entities had lobbied very heavily to remove from the ability of local governments, the ability to put forth appearance standards on single-family housing, and that did not make it through this legislative session. So that's something I think that is still very strong, and the ability to do for both single and multifamily. But yeah, appearance standards are absolutely something that can be added. Some examples of appearance standards can just be things like building materials on the outside of the building are generally what you stick to. So you can talk about things like prohibiting vinyl siding, and requiring, you know, fiber cement board, masonry siding, things like that, or preventing stuff. You can just look at different architectural standards and try to find something that's.
So we can treat this separately than anything else.
Absolutely.
So
when it
we're
comes
not
to
we're
appearance.
not setting a precedent here for the rest of Ellijay.
For multifamily, you could have appearance standards that are only applicable to multifamily. But that of course.
Would carry forward.
Right, and any property that's already zoned for high-density residential and developed, anything new that you put forth that would then make, let's say that building that's out there that can't comply with what you put forth, either the density's too high or the appearance standards don't comply on that property. If it's already been zoned, as you move forward, it becomes a non-conforming property that grandfathers in. And I'm sure your non-conforming policy has certain things in there, so eventually it'll wind up hopefully conforming, but it'll be able to continue being utilized as it is currently being utilized, definitely as long as the use does not cease on the property for a period of time. But yeah, absolutely, the appearance standards, density standards, and so forth, once they're put into place, would cover all those zones across the board that are high-density residential. Especially those moving forward. Anything that's moving forward, the only way that anyone's going to be able to get a building permit to make or to build a new structure or to do significant expansion or major expansion to an existing building, they're going to have to comply with those new standards in order to be a eligible for that building permit.
And just for information, we don't have a lot of R3 zones that aren't already developed. In other words, we don't have a lot of R3 zones just sitting empty waiting for apartments. Almost everything that's zoned R3 has been developed. So,
And this particular property needs rezoning, right?
yeah, it does. We've run into a couple of hiccups, but I think we're gonna be able to work them out. So it would probably, if we stay with an R3 zoning for this type density, then they would be eligible for rezoning up there.
So Ethan, you'll assist in drafting an ordinance
Yes.
for us, okay?
Would we be able to have a first reading at the next meeting? So we can get this moving?
When will your
The next meeting's in a week, isn't
Monday
it? 2
week.
weeks.
Yeah.
30.
Probably not in the next 2 weeks. It'll probably take about a month just to check everything, because when you change anything in an ordinance like this, it can cause a ripple effect throughout the rest of the ordinance. I want to make sure that we're not creating other inconsistencies that we then have to come back and do damage control on in a hasty situation. So we just want to make sure I have time to get through it.
What's the time frame between a first reading and a second? Could we do a call meeting and then a regular meeting or something for the time frame to get it moving?
This being it's a change to the zoning ordinance, doesn't it require going before the
Yeah,
planning
it'll have to go,
commission too?
Yeah.
you're right, it'll have to go through the planning commission, have a first reading by the council, and the next month, the second reading, unless the call meeting works, but I don't know how that works.
I'm not sure about that. I would prefer to ask Kay Ann, and I think Kay Ann's coming today to ask if he gets here. So we'll move forward with that then.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think state law, and Ethan may confirm or deny this, I think state law, once you have a first reading, I think you are supposed to give the public 30 days to review the ordinance change. To come into City Hall and look it over before you.
Did you have anything to add, or?
Not really. I will pass these out and just briefly share with y'all that I have talked with the folks that y'all are currently looking at the possibility of mixed use change for, and they are interested in perhaps doing something a little bit different on part of the property down there as well, where there could be some condos or something like that as part of that. So I think that we're going to continue seeing more and more interest coming to our area. This sheet that I've shared with you just kind of talks about the affordable housing rule, but as you get on into the other sections, all these are based on median income. And like on the second page, I've shared the information that talks about median household income in Gilmer County. Well, the median household income in Gilmer County is talking about 2 people. So on that first page, I showed what it'd be like if it was a household on what the state and the Census Bureau and everyone looks at. But you've got a whole lot of situations where it may just be a young individual fresh out of school. They're not married yet. They don't have the 2 incomes coming in. So I gave a couple of examples, and I used an example of our largest employer in the community about what they start people out at. But the second page shows kind of how that median income for Gilmer County is distributed. And if you look at the color changes in there, actually the median income inside Ellijay City proper is below 40,000, and it's the section of the county up towards Fannin County, Cherry Logging up through there where Goose Island and everything is, that averages us back up to where we get the numbers that the state and the Census Bureau and everybody reports. And then that last page gives a little bit of information about how many housing units we have in Gilmer County as a whole. And the second bullet point there, 74.4% of the housing units in Gilmer County, according to the last census were owner occupied. But across the United States and even pretty much across Georgia, owner occupied is only around 64%. So there is a gap on rental housing in Gilmer County. And I shared with you on that last page what it looks like in Murray County and Gordon County, some of the places that have some larger employers, because, you know, every question I get asked, either the first or second question from anyone looking at coming to bring a business to Ellijay is, can I find the workers? And housing and workers goes together. And you can see that communities like Murray and Gordon have a lower owner-occupied rate, which means that they have a higher availability of rental units. I did the math to see what that gap would be on 17,000 homes in Gilmer County, and it's an enormous number. I mean, according to the math, if you were trying to get the 75% back down to the 64%, you'd need over 2,000 rental units, and we all know that's not reasonable. But I do believe that, based on just the other things that I do in the community, that we have the ability to absorb the number of units that are looking at, both in Ellijay and East Ellijay, that I'm working on at this point without any problems for the communities, or for, quite frankly, for competition for folks that already have units. All it will be doing is increasing the availability so we can bring more qualified workers, or keep the qualified workers from moving away from Gilmer County. Appreciate y'all's time.
Thanks, Ken.
Ken, do you have an extra one of those? You have all the family connection?
Well, you know, thank you, Ken. I just wonder, and maybe you can shed some light on this, I still wonder, and I'm not against anything, so to speak, but I wonder sometimes what the impact could possibly be for Ellijay. Is it positive or negative, or is it indifferent? Or, you understand what we're talking about traffic, and that's a lot of people. Schools. I mean, I do think we need to consider the other aspects of it, just other than just numbers. We need the numbers, yeah.
And part of that's addressed in our zoning ordinance already. I mean, when you're talking about multifamily, it says that it should be located near collector streets and so as not to increase. It's in there. It's one of the factors that would be considered, especially if you were doing rezoning, I think already. Right.
It's absolutely right. One of your rezoning factors is also going to be, will this rezoning have any negative impact on community utilities, and infrastructure, which can be water, sewer, roads, schools, etc. And that's again where you can look at it on a case-by-case basis if someone comes to rezone.
So but how do you accomplish that? I mean, how do you know what the impact's going to be before you?
Require them to, they need to bring forth a plan of some sort for you to review to see how many units they're going to create. And then it's very, there's no perfect clairvoyant solution, but you can look into we have trip generation manuals that say, okay, an apartment of this size with this many units is going to generate X amount of car trips per day per unit. You can multiply that by the number of units and say, okay, based on the traffic counts on this street or this street's capacity, is that going to be an issue? And of course, we know that the traffic's going to occur during peak hours. And then of course your school system, communication with them just to see, amongst the different grades, what the districting is going to be there and what their capacity is overall. Because obviously if there's going to be a couple of hundred units created somewhere, that can be significant because you're likely looking at families that can be occupying those. There's going to be a percent of those units that are going to have children that are going to need to go to your local school.
Hopefully, any new development like this would give the people that are in substandard housing right now an opportunity to move into something a bit more decent. And we have lots of substandard housing in Gilmer County that people are living in.
But, you know, the main thing is what Kent was telling us, you don't have the inventory now to, and leaving out the substandard housing, but if someone wants to come in and
There's nowhere.
be an entrepreneur, be a teacher, whatever, there's really, there's not a whole lot out there.
No. Affordable.
And remember, the higher your census numbers, affect your sales tax
Right.
pie
Yeah.
that you're cutting up for the city of Ellijay.
I have a question for Ethan, if I may. Ethan, the council adopted a zoning district quite a number of years back called PUD, Planned Unit Development. We have PUD-C and PUD-R. But we've really never utilized those districts. Could those districts be used to tailor one of these, either the mixed-use zoning or the apartments?
Generally, planned unit development is related to more single-family or condominium style, mixed residential development.
Okay.
And usually your acres are something like 10-acre minimums. I'd have to look at your specific ordinance to see what yours says, but I know in a number of the other communities that I've worked in, to get a planned unit development zone district, you need about 10-acre minimum, because it's generally like large kind of estate plan communities.
Okay.
So we'll move forward, if you will start moving on that on the new ordinance, we'll get working on that. And hope to have it ready for first reading, not by the upcoming meeting next week, but the following.
And do we, just
So
for clarification, we're looking at just right now making an ordinance update for multifamily, or we're gonna leave the mixed use and the other things aside right now, focus just on the multifamily?
Well, the mixed use you're looking at, you have a meeting after this on that, right?
Right.
So, I mean, continue working on that as well. Because we've discussed that already, but.
I have one
And on
question.
this, I mean, for clarification, I think we all agreed 7,500 square foot for the first unit, 3,000 for each additional, and 12 unit max per acre. Is that all
Okay,
in?
if that's 61 unit on 5 acres, that's gonna be 1 unit too much for the maximum of 12, so.
Yeah, it's even got on here 12.2 units per acre. I don't want to live in the .2.
No, I don't either.
He has the ability to purchase some additional acreage if he needs to, either from the seller that he's dealing with or with the adjoining property owner, either one. But, you know, he's looking at trying to get the most units for the dollar he's investing, and that's the bottom line. And,
Yeah.
you know,
So if
I
we.
tell him he's got to eliminate one building, or he's got to buy a little bit more land.
Okay.
All right, so we'll work on that for us, thank you. The next item under workshop, and I also put it on the agenda under new business in case you want to move forward with it. We've been looking at purchasing a backhoe for the street crew. We've got two members of the crew currently that can operate one. We hire this out a lot, and it's expensive to hire someone, and everybody's busy right now with the building the way it is. They've located one, and I've got Stephen out there who's nervous about coming in here and talking to the council, I think, but, so we won't pick on him too bad, but Stephen's very familiar with him, he can operate it. This is, the second page, right behind the agenda, it's got what it is, it's, JCB, it's four-wheel drive, it's not, if you're familiar with backhoes, there's like a Case 580, you see a lot of those that are really big. This one's not quite as big, and I think it would suit the needs of the city a little bit better. Come on in, Stephen. But the hours, 1,216 hours is not a lot of hours on the machine. That little Kubota tractor I've got, it's got almost 13. Come in, just have a seat, doesn't make you stand up or anything. I mean, I mentioned the brand, what do you wanna add? You can,
The year model, the hours that it has on it, it's in great shape. The tires and everything on it's good, all the systems on it work. And compared to the ones we've looked at before, it seems to be the better of the deal.
and we've not got a, yeah, we do have a price, it's at 25.
Yeah.
Okay. And this, I mean, y'all's opinion, or we've got enough in the SPOS budget, I mean, we can afford to buy it this year, if y'all are comfortable with that.
I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, a few jobs we would pay for it with what we're paying private contractors.
Right.
There'll be, still be some times we need someone else with bigger equipment to do things, but we can do a
They
lot
won't
of
do
stuff
the bridge down
ourselves.
there. It won't be big enough.
Won't
No.
be big enough for
You're
that.
gonna need a big tractor to do the bridge.
Yeah. You need a motion, or?
I put it, we're still in workshop, we'll move on. I put it in workshop to discuss, but if y'all are good, we can move on to new
Yeah.
business and review an action on backhoe acquisition. So now I can have a motion.
I make a motion, we purchase the backhoe as presented, the 2010 model.
Second.
Have a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor, show of hands. None opposed, motion carries. Thanks, David. And that's the only business we had down. We do have our city attorney with us, and we've got executive session to discuss pending litigation. So appreciate all of you coming. You're welcome to stay around. I don't anticipate any action other than adjournment after the executive session.